Church is designed to be a family. He wants to know you. He wants you to know him. I believe everybody in the world wants to know who they were made to be and what they were made to do. And people who don't know God will see what you do and they'll glorify him. Morning, WellSpring. It's such an honor to be here with you. I'm Andy. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and I'm just grateful, honestly, to be able to come into your home and to be able to speak to you wherever you are. And I just want to welcome you, whether you're bored today because of all the shutdown, whether you're scared because of all the unknown, uncertainty, and health concerns and the economic concerns. Maybe you're lonely because you're isolated and you don't have people around you. Maybe you're just frazzled because your kids aren't in school. Whatever your situation is, I want you to know that we're here with you, we're here for you, and personally, I'm just honored that you let me speak into your life for just a moment, and we're excited about what God's going to do today. The last 3 weeks we've been digital, we've been doing this online, and so much has changed in the world all around us over the last few weeks. I saw this online. I thought it was a great way to view how the world is. 4 weeks ago, people were saying this is a political hoax. The media's blamed for all of this. Then 3 weeks ago, people were saying it's Chicken Little, the sky's not falling, they better not cancel school over this stupid thing. 2 weeks ago, people said the government's taking over your lives and you're falling for it. Where are you going to eat out tonight? Because I'm going somewhere. And then last week, people said if you let your kids play with friends, you're potentially infecting or even killing hundreds or thousands of others. You should only be going to the grocery store and getting takeout meals where there's no risk of infection. The lines at Chick-fil-A are ridiculous. They better get some more help up here right now. And today, people are saying the police need to arrest anyone who leaves their home. So much has changed just in the last couple of weeks. And these are unusual times. There's no doubt about it. And no one really knows how this is going to play out. Lots of really smart people have given their best guess, but no one really knows. For the last couple of weeks, we have continued here with the same messages that we've been planning to do for such a long time, really. Not because I had them all written out, although that would have been really nice if I had that done. I hadn't, but we kept with it because we felt like the topics were even more relevant now than they were before. 2 weeks ago, I urged you to find a spiritual family. And last week, I begged you to come to know God, not just know about God, but to be in a relationship with your Father. And when this crisis is over, and it's going to be over at some point. I mean, we are going to come out of this. We're going to make it. And when this crisis is over, one of the lasting marks is going to be a desire for community and a desire for spiritual things. Mark my words, you're going to see this. When we're all allowed to crawl out of our homes, you're going to see people flocking once they feel safe to community-oriented things. Churches certainly are going to be full, but also nightclubs and restaurants and bars and coffee shops. Because people want to have community, they're made for community, and we've had such a vacuum of that. They're going to be trying to fill in that space, that void. And when this is all over, people are going to be looking for spiritual things. Some will try church, some will try yoga or some other sense to get something spiritual, meditation or so. But they're going to be wanting spiritual things. Because Jesus told us all along, when you boil down what's really true in the world, it's a connection to God and a connection to people. And we've sensed that more, I think, in these last couple of weeks than maybe we were even aware of was true before. So finding family, knowing God, those are among the most important things I could tell you as a pastor. And today's message, I think, may be even more relevant, maybe one of the most relevant messages I've ever had the opportunity to give. It was all what God had planned out weeks and months ago. People have faced the crisis of social distancing. They faced isolation. Companies have faced it by trying to figure out how to do remote offices and supply chains and things. Churches have faced the crisis by not being able to meet in their buildings and going online as we have and trying to do things that way. Some people have faced it with isolation or even maybe some sickness, and we've adjusted. Some have paid the price, but most of us have just adjusted, and we survived. But if we're not wrong on this, if the smart people at the CDC and the World Health Organization, the NIH, HHS, if all those smart people aren't wrong, this is not the crisis that we're in now. This is the moment before the crisis. This is the proverbial calm before the storm. Just this week, the Surgeon General said, and I quote, "This is going to get bad." Now, you may not have the same medical training that I do. Let me unpack that for you. He's saying this is going to get bad. It's sort of straightforward. And one report I read said the coronavirus crisis will be the most significant historical event of our lifetime, bigger than 9/11. And for those of us who are old enough to remember what 9/11 felt like, they're predicting this may be even a bigger disruption in hindsight than what that was. Wall Street has responded to this moment by having some of the most turbulent 2 weeks of our lifetime in history. And Congress has responded to this moment by passing the largest stimulus bill in history. Are they all wrong? I certainly hope they are, and we should pray that they are. But if they're not, it's going to be time for the church to mobilize. It's not a moment for us to shrink back. It's not a moment for us to be afraid. It's not a moment for us to be self-centered. It's a moment, our moment, to be the hands and feet of Jesus in a world that's going to really need us, that's going to be even more desperate for community, even more desperate for God, even more desperate for something that's hopeful and spiritual and significant. And you have that foundation. Jesus said, those who put my words into practice are building their life, their house, on a rock that stands. And when the storms come, and that's what we're facing right now, those houses will stand firm. Some of the houses around you, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, in your social settings, some of those houses are going to fall over these next weeks. And they're going to need us, the church, to be there to help them and serve them through this time. Right before Jesus was arrested, near the end of his ministry, he gathered his close friends together to celebrate the Passover meal. We call it now the Last Supper or communion. It's a culminating event in the life of Jesus. It's a moment. And John describes it really well. In John chapter 13, verse 3, it says, Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and that he would return to God. So, in response to that, and I stopped it because I want to let you fill in the gap. Like, what would you do if you're Jesus? You've been given all authority from God. You've come to the end of your life and you've done it well. You've led this out the way you're supposed to do, and now God has given you your moment to exercise your authority, to stretch your legs, to get what's coming to you after all the giving that he had been doing. What are you going to do now? So what does Jesus do in this moment? It says Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, that he had come from God, and that he would return to God. So he got up from the table, he took off his robe, he wrapped a towel around his waist, and he poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he had around him. Jesus gave us an endearing model for what authority looks like. If you have authority, you better find a way to serve. If you have the opportunity or privilege, you better wrap a towel around your waist and find someone to help. My friend Dr. Thomas Jones recently shared a great coronavirus prescription. If we're going to lay this out for our world, for a healthy person, a healthy family, a healthy community, a healthy church, really for our whole world, his prescription was wash your hands and along the way figure out how to wash a few feet. I think it's a great mantra for us today. We've been given so much opportunity as a country. We've been given amazing freedoms that we've just come to take for granted. We have an economy and an education system that allows us to grow and stretch and thrive in ways that the rest of the world marvels at. We have a government that bails people out when we hit hard times. You know, a lot of these communities around the world are going to face the same hard times that we are, but they're not going to have the outside trillions of dollars pumping into their homes. And all of these things are unique to us. Not for us to feel guilty about them, not for us to stick our head, but for us to be aware, mindful of how much has been given to us that we didn't, just what we were born into. Most nations throughout most eras haven't had any of these three, let alone all three of the things together, the economy and the government and the education system. Jesus said, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who's been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. We've been given much. Even during perilous times, we can acknowledge that we've been given much, and we're rapidly approaching a time when we can give back in return. This is our time. This is our moment for the people of God to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to wrap a towel around our waist, and to serve our friends, our neighbors, our world around us, whose houses are falling spiritually, and who need the help that we can provide. A few minutes after Jesus says these things, after he washed their feet, he was celebrating the Last Supper with his disciples, and he told them that one of them would betray him. He says in verse 23, the disciples began to ask each other, Which one would do such a thing? Who's going to betray Jesus? I mean, they're all sitting there together drinking in his words. Who's going to betray this guy? Now, a funny thought that I'd never had before is, what's Judas doing in the middle of this? Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. Judas knows it's him. He's sitting there at the table with the 13 of them. Does he participate in this conversation? I mean, it would just be weird if he's participating. Like, yeah, who would do such a thing? Like, that's weird. It's also weird if he's ignoring them. Like, Peter says, who do you think Jesus is talking about? And Judas is like, hey, dude, can you pass the pesto? Like, just completely, like, it's weird either way. What was Judas doing? I don't know. Now, by the way, this is one of the miracles of digital. Like, if you guys were in the room, either you would have laughed at that with me, and I would have felt better about myself, or you would have had the eerie silence that I'm experiencing right now, and then I would have made fun of you for that, and then you would have laughed at me. Either way, I feel better about myself, but now I'm looking at this silly camera, and you have nothing to give me at all. But that's all right. It was funny. I'll take that for myself. I'll assume you're laughing at home, which is great. So the discussion goes quickly after that into a debate about who's the greatest. I mean, that's a natural thing. If someone's going to betray, then, well, who's on the other end of this? And in verse 24, they began to argue among themselves about who'd be the greatest among them. Like, who's the worst, and then who's the greatest? And we're always ranking ourselves that way. We do that in our families. We do that in our businesses. We do that in our communities. And I wonder how long Jesus let that go on. I mean, here's Jesus. If there was ever a moment where everyone at the table should know who's the greatest, it was that moment. There's 13 of them there. Jesus, the Son of God, and a bunch of schmucks there amongst them. He was clearly the greatest, and he had just given them a model by washing their feet. And here he is eating with a bunch of weirdos who are jockeying for position. It was just quite a contrast. And Jesus' answer was profound. Verse 25, he says, he told them, in this world the kings and great men lord it over their people, yet they're called friends of the people. I don't think I'd ever noticed that verse before. It jumped out at me this week because we see it today. You know, celebrities and politicians and professional athletes, musicians, they're sometimes the most narcissistic, greedy people on the planet, and yet we idolize them and direct all of our attention their direction. And Jesus said, they're lording it over you, and yet you idolize them. But my way is different, he says. Christians have to be different. He said, those among you, it'll be different among you. For those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant. That is different. That's different than the way our world does it, our culture does it. You know, just a few days earlier in Matthew 23, during that same last week of Jesus, he's having a similar conversation, but instead with his leaders, he's doing it with the religious leaders of the day, and he goes on a tear. I mean, he is totally ripping into these guys. You can read it later. The whole chapter, Matthew 23, is him talking to these guys in such stark terms. He's blasting their hypocrisy, their pride, their pretense. He's really ripping into them. Now, he's speaking to a group of religious leaders in the first century, but man, sadly, I see some of his words in my own life, and I see them in the churches around us, in our world. And I think we all have a lot to learn from Matthew 23. But there in the middle of his rant, he contrasts their behavior with his vision for leadership. Verse 11 says, the greatest among you will be your servant. The greatest among you will be your servant. He's talking specifically, again, to the religious leaders, the Pharisees of that day. And he's saying the way you're approaching your opportunities is wrong. You've gotten power, you've gotten privilege, you've gotten authority, and you found yourself enjoying those things, which is great, but you're seeing it wrong. The greatest among you is going to handle it different. The greatest among you is going to be a servant. And I really spent some time this week thinking about what does that mean? Because I think he could be meaning two different things. I'm not really sure which one he's meaning. Number one, he may be saying that even great people are willing to serve. Like the CEO who's willing to get his hands dirty. Or the restaurant owner who's willing to go out and bust tables or wash dishes. You know, I love it when rich and powerful people show that kind of humility. It's inspiring to me. I remember when my kids were younger, we used to go to Holiday World, to theme park up in the cornfields of Indiana. Went there every summer, like clockwork. And this is a great park. It's just, if you've been there, it's designed to be family friendly. It's very, very clean. It's very, the people are very customer service oriented and all of that. And the lady who owns the park, she may be retired now, I'm not sure, but the lady who owns the park, she used to be on TV and commercials and things. You'd see her advertising the park. And on more than one occasion, when we were there as a family coming in, as they kind of herd you like cattle, getting you to the front gate to take all your money, as we're going in, multiple times, we would see out in the beginning of the day, this rich lady who owns the multi-million-dollar park out there with a broom and a dustpan sweeping up cigarette butts from the night before. Now, what's she doing? Did she not have enough help? Did she need to hire some people? I mean, here's this multi-million-dollar lady who's running this huge business, doing a minimum wage job. I think she was setting a tone. Like, my park's going to be different, and nobody in my park's going to be above sweeping up cigarette butts. We're all going to do this together, and you could just see the difference that her leadership brought. You know, as they say, where I grew up, she wasn't too big for her britches, and I love that model that she gave for that park, her business, but it's the same model that Jesus has given us. I think you see that some of that at Chick-fil-A. I don't think it's a coincidence they have great customer service and that often the people who own that franchise are the ones who are working in that franchise, not some corporate guy 1,000 miles away. Their owners are there taking out the trash, wiping down tables. They serve. The greatest among you will serve. Is that what Jesus meant? I think maybe. But I also think he may have meant something different. Jesus may be saying that greatness, true greatness, comes from lowering yourself through service. Like you arrive at greatness on the other side of service. As someone once said, you descend into greatness. I think it's an interesting question. Like, which came first, the greatness or the service? You see this in people. Which came first? Like Mother Teresa, for instance. This woman founded the Missionaries of Charity in 1950. She served among the poorest of the poor until her death in 1997. At the time of her death, she was heralded around the world as one of the greatest people to have ever lived. And the Missionaries of Charity that she founded operates today over 600 missions, schools, shelters in 120 countries around the world, among the poorest of the poor, among the least of these, as Jesus called them. Now, which came first for her, the greatness or the service? Did she serve even though she ran this massive organization in 120 countries? Or did her service lead her to what we see in her as greatness? You see, self-centeredness comes natural to all of us. It's destructive for our spiritual health. We have more wealth, more education, more opportunity than the rest of the world does, and it can lead us, if we're not careful, if we're not intentional about it, to a level of self-focus that's harmful to our souls. It makes us less people, and service is the only antidote that I know of. I remember reading a story about a missionary around the year 1900. He was coming from his service overseas, coming back into New York, and he came into the harbor, and he had kind of an entourage with him. He's kind of a famous big deal. And as he got off the boat, there's a whole bunch of people there to meet him. They were going to take him to his hotel and then take him onto the arena where he was going to speak to a large crowd. Now, true confession, I looked online and could not find this story or the name of this guy. So I don't even know who this guy is. I just thought he looked like a 1900s missionary, so that's the best I got. Anyway, so he gets off the boat, large entourage with him, a lot of people there to meet him, to take him on to his engagement. And he said, I need to go to the bathroom first. So he goes into the bathroom, and they're all waiting outside for him, and he takes a minute, and then he takes another. He's there quite a while, and it gets to the point of being kind of awkward. And finally, they draw straws, and the short straw wins, and the guy says, I'll go in and check on him. And he goes into this bathroom, and this world-famous missionary's in there picking up trash off the floor. He said, man, what are you doing? They're paying people to do that. Let somebody else handle that. And he said, no, I'll just clean it up. And here he was, serving. Which came first, the service or the greatness? You know this is true, by the way. You've seen it with your own eyes. How many of you have said or ever heard somebody else say, that guy's really rich, but you'd never know it? We notice that when rich people don't act a certain way because we know it's not good for us. Riches and the self-centeredness that they allow are challenging for our souls. It was Jesus said that it's hard for someone to enter who's rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus wasn't saying that it's bad to be rich. It wasn't saying that riches are evil. He was just saying it makes it more challenging. Like the degree of difficulty goes up if you've got extra. Like an Olympic routine or something. Your life routine is going to be more challenging spiritually if you've been entrusted with extra. It's just harder. And the only antidote I know is service, giving of yourself away. Jesus said the one who tries to keep his life will lose it. The one who gives his life away for him will find true life. So is Jesus saying that great people are willing to serve or that true greatness only comes through service? I think he's saying both. And friends, this is our moment. If everything goes the way they're predicting, and no one really knows, but if everything goes the way they're predicting, we're on the front edge over these next couple of weeks of our moment as a church, as the people of God, not WellSpring, the church, the people of God, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to meet the needs of their neighbors and their friends and the vulnerable among us. I love the story of Esther. If you've not read it before, it might be a good one to read again. Esther became, through a whole series of circumstances, the queen of the nation. And there was an evil man, Haman, who wanted to destroy all the Jews. It was going to be like this genocide from ethnic cleansing of the Jewish people. And Esther found out about it, and she was scared to go to the king because you don't just go to the king. And so her uncle's like, you got to go to the king. You got to use your opportunity. Use this moment. Use your power and privilege to go to the king on behalf of your people. But she had a lot of reasons to not want to do that. It was scary. There's some personal risk involved in going to the king. But then Mordecai, her uncle, says to her in verse 14, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from their place. God's going to do what God's going to do. He's going to continue to be God. But who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Friends, who knows that we haven't arrived at this moment for this time? What if all the authority we've been given, all the opportunity and privilege and resource, what if all of that wasn't designed to get us to this moment? We didn't see it coming, but God's seen it coming. And what if it was for this, possibly the greatest historical event of our lifetimes? What if God intends for us to inject hope and help and faith and love and care in such desperate times to people whose homes spiritually are falling because they have no foundation? I have no idea what the next 2 to 3 weeks will bring. And I don't know, like Esther, what personal risk that may require of you or what personal risk that may require of me. If you'd have told me a couple weeks ago, even a few months ago, what we'd be doing right now, that I'd be in an empty room talking to a camera, I never would have believed it. I said, you're crazy. None of us know what the next 2 to 3 weeks is going to bring. But if it gets bad, if all the predictions come true, we'll each be ready. This is our moment. And we will know that we've arrived at the chance for us to stretch our faith and to stretch our legs to be the hands and feet of Jesus. The struggle of the moment is that nobody can react fast enough. Government can inject dollars, but they can't inject help into people's lives. They have to do a broad stroke aid package. Businesses are trying to adjust. Community groups are trying to react, but no one has the manpower to be intimately involved at a relational level with millions of people without a massive budget. But the church is prone for that. The church has organizations, communities in every single community of our nation, every single community of the world. We have people on the ground in every neighborhood, down every street. There's no other organization like the church that's prone to react in this moment without millions and millions and billions of dollars. But we can do that. As each of us does a little, it amounts to a great amount of response. Can I ask you to do just one specific thing here in just a moment when we get off this call? Like as soon as the live stream is over, while you're still there as a family, while you're still kind of in the moment of worship, I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask that you get out a piece of paper or maybe type on your phone or laptop and create a list of anyone that you know that's vulnerable. For sake of the discussion, let me just give a couple options. Maybe they're elderly, maybe they're financially stretched, maybe they've lost their job, or maybe they just have kids and they're trying to figure out how to handle childcare while they're still working and schools aren't in session, but they're vulnerable. And let me just say to you, we're saying vulnerable people as if that doesn't apply to any of us. I know some of you are vulnerable. Some of you watching the stream right now are vulnerable. You fit into one or more of those categories, and you need the church to be there for you. And I'm hoping that we're going to inspire some people to reach out to you independently. But if you're not getting that, we want to be here for you. Reach out to the church. Keith's going to tell you at the end of the service how you can reach out to us. Do that, and let us be there for you. Let us be the church for you, because you're vulnerable. We want to help. So make a list of names with names of actual people when this service is over. Sit down as a family and think about relatives or neighbors or friends of classmates or something. And then determine if you're willing to pay the price for them. As the church, are you willing to pay the price for them? And I'm going to use the word pay as an acronym because it makes it easier to remember. So will you commit to pray for them every day by name? Will you commit to ask them how you can help? They know the ways they need help. Maybe they just need somebody to check in on them or to call or to send a text. But ask them how you can help. And then yield to God as he leads you on their behalf. Pray, ask them how you can help, and then yield to God with whatever God says as you're praying for them. You know, the normal objections for something like this is time and money, right? I often say, we got everything we need but time and money, which kind of undoes everything that you need. But time and money is always the objection on something like this, because to invest in other people's lives is going to take some time, might take some money. But I think this crisis is unique in that while people can't flock to the church like this building, they can flock to the church like you and like me. And most of us have got a little more time on our hands than we've had before. As the world has shut down, you find yourself with a little more time. Some of you are even struggling with boredom a little bit. You got a little extra time. And money, the government just agreed to send you some money into your home. Now listen, some of you, hear me clearly, some of you desperately need that aid. You've lost your job, you cut way back on hours, and I'm so glad that money's coming to you as a lifeline to help. And we're here to help you too. If you need us, let us know how to help you. Now, all of us can use that money, but some of us are not clinging to it like others are. If you're clinging to it, I'm glad it's coming. If you're not clinging to it, can I just ask you to set some of it aside? You may have things it needs to go to, but could you just set some of it aside to help the vulnerable people on your list? Or maybe to help an organization who's reaching out into the community and changing the world? If you're needing it, cling to it, great, use it. If you're not, let us use that as a safety net to help those who need more help even than it can provide. So right now, some of us have a little extra time, some of us have a little extra money, and Jesus said the greatest among us will be servants. And there are vulnerable people all around you who need you to serve them. So wash your hands, and along the way, figure out how to wash a few feet. I saw recently online a post that I don't know if I agree with or not theologically, but I thought it was interesting for this moment. It was an interesting way of seeing things, and I thought it might spur some conversations in your living room. It says this, it says, in 3 short months, just like God did with the plagues of Egypt, God has taken away everything that we worship. God said, you want to worship athletes? I'll shut down the stadiums. You want to worship musicians? I'll shut down the civic centers. You want to worship actors? I'll shut down the theaters. You want to worship money? I'll shut down the economy. I'll collapse the stock market. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's an interesting moment we found ourselves in, is all of the things that we've leaned on have been taken down by this virus, and what's left, what's true, is a love for God, God's love for us, and a love for each other. And that's what matters most, even when all those props were still in place. This is our time, friends. This is our moment. Over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of conversations in our culture among state officials and government officials about essential workforce versus non-essential. So doctors and bankers and grocers and such, they're all essential, and they are. But others who are not essential need to take extra precautions for the public health. Stay at home more often. Be less engaged. Let me just say something else that I've not heard anybody else say. The church is essential. Not like we're going to go against the government orders and force everybody to come into this building and risk public health and all that. I'm not saying that. We're going to abide by what the government says on those things. But your role is essential, as the hands and feet of Jesus. So doctors are going to take care of people's bodies. Bankers are going to take care of their budgets. You're there to take care of their soul. And no one else is doing that. No one else is the salt of the earth. No one else is the light of the world. God has placed that on your shoulders. And you and I are essential to the fabric of our culture. The world needs you. These next days and weeks, you, friend, are essential. Open up your eyes, because this is your moment. The greatest among you will be your servant. Let me end with a story that I read this week from John Piper. John Piper writes several years ago how 2 ladies from his church, Ruby Eliason and Laura Edwards, were killed doing missions work in Cameroon. Now that may have created a picture in your head that's not actually what was happening. Ruby was in her 80s. She's a little old lady, been single her whole life, trained as a nurse, and was spending her retirement years doing missions work in Cameroon among the poorest of the poor. She poured her life out so that Jesus Christ would be known among the sick and the poor in the hardest places. Laura Edwards was a medical doctor from Minneapolis, St. Paul also. And in her retirement, she and Ruby partnered up. Laura was also near 80, And they were going from village to village, offering medical care to the poorest of the poor, the neediest of the needy, the least of these, as Jesus would say, in Cameroon. And one day they were driving from one village to the next, and they're in some rickety little vehicle, and the brakes went out, and without warning, they went off the edge of the cliff and plummeted instantly to their death, straight to the arms of Jesus. And Piper asks a very insightful question. He says, was this a tragedy? And in some ways you think, well, yeah, these are two great women who are gone. But he said, think of it this way. Two women in their 70s and 80s, a whole life devoted to one idea, Jesus Christ, magnified among the poor and the needy and the sick and the hardest places. And after 20 years, after most of their American counterparts were spending time and money in Florida, throwing their life away, quite literally, they fly literally from this life into eternity. Is that a tragedy? He says, I would say it's not a tragedy. But let me read you an account that is a tragedy. He said the same week they died, I read this account in a Reader's Digest. Remember when you used to have those in doctor's offices? This is from the pages of Reader's Digest. He says, Bob and Penny took an early retirement from their jobs in the Northeast 5 years ago when he was 59 and she was 51. Now they live in Punta Gorda, Florida, where they cruise on their 30-foot trawler, they play softball, and they collect shells. Piper says that's the tragedy. There are people in this country that are spending billions of dollars to tell you that what I just said was a lie, that that's the high life, that's the goals, to get to there on the beach collecting your shells. But can I get just a moment to give the other side of the story? Can I plead with you to live for a different dream? The last chapter of your life, right before you go stand before your Maker, who gave you all of this opportunity, all of this reality, all of this resource and money and authority, are you going to stand before him and say, God, look at my shell collection and my golf swing is awesome. Don't waste your life. The greatest among us will be a servant. And God has given us this moment. Live it to the end. Live it the best you have. And on the other side of life, when we're standing there with Ruby and Laura, you're going to look back at today and be awfully glad that you were focused during this season. Let's pray together. God, I ask that you would give us clarity of thought, clarity of heart and mind and soul. Help us, God, to see this world for what it is. Help us to see this moment for what it is. Help us to see this crisis for what it is. And God, I pray that our houses will be built on the rock of your Son, Jesus, and his word, and that none of us would be afraid, none of us would be scared, none of us would be frantically running around looking for answers, but that we, God, would be a lifeline, the salt and light of the earth to all of those neighborhoods of houses around us that are falling. We need you to direct us, God. We need you to lead us and guide us. Help us to live our life in ways that will make sense on the other side. Help us to be the greatest among us in our communities, in our homes, in our businesses as we serve. And we do it all, God, for your glory, for your fame and renown. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.